Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Meantime, on Monday, Spirit Airlines declared bankruptcy. And Alicia, part of what's notable about this in the context of antitrust is there was a recent effort to combine Spirit Airlines and JetBlue Airlines. And the theory there was that that would have created the fifth largest U.S. carrier, about 11% market share, and that would have made the combined Spirit and JetBlue more capable of taking on the big guys, Delta, American, Southwest, United. And what we have instead is now a bankruptcy for Spirit Airlines. So what was the antitrust theory there? What was the arguments that was used to block that merger? And then what do you make of the result and the way that the airline business for these ultra low-cost carriers might be heading instead?
Well, I think what's important to keep in mind is that the Justice Department here, it just doesn't believe in any kind of consolidation. They basically come up with theories to block mergers because they just don't want to let companies merge. And here you had a scrappy upstart, Spirit, which is a budget discount carrier along with Frontier and Allegiant. It was struggling, but it's also been slashing fares to try to gain market share. And it had this kind of innovative business model, at least initially last decade, in which it kind of unbundled fares, so required people to pay more for carry-ons, extra legroom, actually eliminated the complimentary stack, so sorry, no pretzels. And this allowed it to gain some market share. But then other legacy carriers like United, Delta, and such, they followed its examples and adopted the same kind of unbundled rates and provided a kind of a lower bare bones economy class. And then Spirit was struggling to keep up with them, especially because it didn't have as many gates at airports, so it couldn't fly as much. They didn't have as many pilots. And the result is that they couldn't actually spread their capital costs and, labor costs and such across a broader, bigger business. And part of the goal with JetBlue kind of swooping in, and by the way, JetBlue has also been losing money over the last several years. Part of that goal was to basically strengthen both of them, give them more gates, pilots, so that they could compete with the big guys. Now, the Justice Department argued that, well, in various routes, that this would reduce the competition and make markets more concentrated, which would increase prices. And the judge earlier this year ruled and gave credence to that theory and saying, well, yes, flyers overall would benefit from the JetBlue Spirit merger. However, on certain select routes, they would actually have fewer choices, and therefore, under the Clayton Act, this merger must be blocked. I think they had strong grounds for appeal, and they were planning to appeal, but the problem was the financing for the deal and the time it would take to launch an appeal would have interfered with other business plans and moving forward, including Spirit needed to figure out, well, do we try to restructure and refinance our debt? Should we start to prepare for a bankruptcy and such? JetBlue shareholders weren't all that keen on the deal anyways. Fast forward almost a year, and yes, Spirit has run into the same headwinds that were expected. And now you have a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Maybe it'll be able to restructure. I'm a little skeptical of that. I think it's going to probably have to liquidate, sell off its assets. The two other bigger airlines, maybe United, Delta, will sweep in and get some of its gates along with its planes. And the ironic result is that the bigger carriers will probably just end up getting bigger.
The Journal's editorial this week on the Spirit bankruptcy and this antitrust question has this line: "Too bad the government won't compensate the workers, flyers, and creditors harmed by its blunder," unquote. But Monet, I might settle for a sorry, a whoops. We'll try to do better and take a less aggressive approach next time. And the difficulty of that is that it's impossible to run the counterfactual. And it's true that even if Spirit and JetBlue had been allowed to combine, they might still have difficulty competing with the bigger carriers. But the complications and the impossibility of knowing the alternative is part of what makes me think that maybe a better approach by the government would be a little bit more cautious about wading into these complicated markets and trying to tweak this knob this direction by 5 degrees and think that that's going to be a solution to some problem that some antitrust regulators and a judge say is existing, even if consumers don't see it.
Well, the anti-merger hawks always look at proposed mergers and see a large business about to get even bigger, more dominant, and enrich itself, when the story often, as in the case of Spirit Airlines, is a troubled company looking for a buyer because they don't see any avenue to continue competing and selling into the marketplace on their own. And so sometimes blocking these mergers can actually diminish competition because it's removing one of the potential players that needed a merger as its only avenue to remaining active from the market. And so, as you said, I don't think we can expect an apology anytime soon from these people who often lead to unintended consequences like this. You'd hope that they'd be paying attention because these sorts of cases are only going to continue. We're seeing one pending right now with U.S. Steel, of course, which is attempting to sell itself to Nippon Steel, the potential Japanese buyer, as opposed to a Department of Justice antitrust enforcers. This one is falling under the review of CFIUS, the Foreign Investment Committee, as Alicia mentioned. And it's essentially the same story. U.S. Steel has been struggling for decades after decades. Their market share has stagnated, and they really need a buyer to come in and recapitalize them. Nippon Steel in Japan has promised to do so, but for purely political reasons of not wanting this storied American company to fall under foreign control, the federal government is threatening to block that deal and potentially lead to the closure of U.S. Steel's main plants, furloughs for their employees. And if that is the case, it will have no benefit to American consumers, American workers, and yet there probably will be very few, if any, lessons learned by the people who continue to intervene in the merger market in exactly this way.
Thank you, Monet and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button. We'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.